Hey everybody, welcome to WHUS Stores. I'm the Reverend Brian Blair and you're listening to Crossroads, the show on every Monday where we ask our guests, what is the intersection of your everyday life and your faith life, whatever you think of as faith for you. Got a wonderful guest today, Gary Anderson. Hi Gary.
Hi Reverend Brian, how are you?
I'm good. Glad you could be here.
All right, happy to be here, thanks.
All right. Let's jump right into it, Gary. Why don't you, if you don't mind, could you please tell us what you do for a living?
Sure. Well, first, I'm a dad and a father and a husband.
That counts. That's living right there.
That's living, that's for sure. That's probably not getting to your question, but that's what I see as my main role in this life right now.
Good answer.
But outside of my house, I am the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the town of Manchester, Connecticut. Which is a town, I don't know, like 10 miles to the west of here in Stores.
You don't know or you do know?
Don't know what?
You do know where the town is,
I do know where it is. That's
right.
a good question. Yeah, it's a good test. I don't know where Stores is, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's about 10 miles to the west.
We're here.
Right. A lot of people from Yukon, I think, live in Manchester, maybe shop there. So most of our listeners probably know.
In that role, could you describe for us some of what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So, planning can be called a lot of different things. I mean, you might have heard of it described as urban planning or city planning or town planning. And really what planners do is we kind of help a community or, a specific place kind of think about what what they want to be in the future, and then try to implement that with the residents of a community, with the community itself, businesses and other people that have interest in the community, try to get to that vision of what they want a place to be. So that's obviously, a lot different now than it was when, city planners were planning New York City or Chicago or cool places like that. In the Northeast now we're fairly built out, in a place like Manchester in particular. It's kind of like an old mill city. And we're, trying to fix our mistakes over time. Planners have certainly made mistakes over time, as everyone has, and also, really kind of respond to the times, right? So respond to what the market is saying at this time, what people want during this time period in history, and trying to make, in my case, Manchester the best place that it can be.
Thanks, Gary. I just want to hold on for 1 second. I see we may have a caller online. I want to apologize for that. We don't take call-ins during the show. I did have a Twitter account where people could contact the show.
Wow. In the first 5 minutes, somebody wants to ask us a question. I can't believe
because it's you, Gary.
Yeah, I guess
you. So. But I'm sorry for the call-in that we have to miss it. But for the general audience out there, sorry about the call-ins. If you really want to talk to Gary, I know you can call his office.
Absolutely.
And he's there for anyone. And if you really want to talk to me, you can call my office at St. Mark's Episcopal Chapel right here in Stores. I think that's a good description. I appreciate that. How about if you could describe for us what your faith life is?
That's a maybe even better question, a tougher question for me. But just generally, I grew up Lutheran, so that's those of us that are kind of in the mainline denominations of Protestantism, I think, know that that's kind of close to the Episcopal Church, so I think culturally I have that background, and as a kid, I went to church. My family was always involved in church life, and I went to summer camp, which is, we can talk about that maybe as well. That's a big part of my life and has been since then.
Can I stop you there for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because I've done a lot of time work at summer camps too.
Okay.
And I'm listening to what you do for a living, and it strikes me that a summer camp is a miniature city.
Interesting.
Its own little bubble of life, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Where did the two overlap for you?
Wow, summer camp and current life. Yeah.
You know what it's like to get tribal when people get crazy, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I want my Jell-O and I want it now.
Yeah. You know what? I've honestly never thought about that before. But we have a map of the camp. I went to a camp called Camp Calumet in New Hampshire, and my wife and I are still associate with that camp, and my kids go, and all sorts of cool stuff like that. But thinking about like the systems that are involved. So yeah, you have places where people live, you have places where people gather, you have places, you have a transportation system, right? At camp,
The
usually
back
that's
of your
like walking
counselor?
around. Yeah, back of your counselor maybe. Piggyback rides and bikes and things like that. But it's kind of a system and people living in community, right? So I guess that's kind of the big connection is you have people that are by choice or because they have to living together and trying to respond to what the needs of that community are and trying to be the best camp or the best community that you can be. And so back to your original question though about my faith life. So I grew up really kind of enjoying being a church going person. Like I met good friends there. I went to camp there. We went to like youth gatherings and stuff. So to me, it was always fun, and certainly has shaped me as I've become an adult. I think whenever people have asked me over time, like, well, what does it mean to be, Christian or Lutheran or whatever? I feel like the way I've described it, sometimes people are like taken aback by it a little bit. Like the way I described it is like, God loves us and wants us to be happy, and the way we live our lives is in response to that. Basically, that's kind of what I typically boil it down to. There's no but the basis of faith is not responsibility or guilt or these other things that people may have experienced in their lives. So to me, it's really helped me be confident and helped me, recognize that I'm a beloved child of God and that, I live my life in response to that.
For me, I would say that's like a perfect response. That's the angle I come at it from too. It's like, what is your, like you said, well, I keep using the word response now, right? But what is your response? And then all things begin and go back to that one source. And I like that you talked about how it helps you have a certain degree of confidence. I do see sometimes that people who practice whatever faith kind of have a list of do's and don'ts. And I do see it being a kind of healthier approach when people think of it as a heartfelt response. We could hang out, Gary, you and I.
Absolutely. Well, that's what we're doing now, I think.
I think we are. I appreciate it. You talk about this idea of a response and you do city planning. The term justice comes to my mind as a Christian, and I'm wondering if you could talk about, in terms of justice, a bit of how you approach what you do.
Sure. Another good question, Brian. Nice job.
Yeah.
So, in grad school, when I was learning how to be a planner, there was a course we took in environmental justice, and justice has taken on its own, I think, new meanings and continues to do so today. So it probably means something different than it meant when I was studying it. But just a little quick story. Justice is part of the reason that I got into urban planning in the first place. After I was in college, I was a teacher, a 5th and 6th grade teacher, through a program called Teach for America, in which, they train people to go into low-resourced school systems and be teachers, basically, with really intense training. So I did that for 2 years in Newark. It was the best thing that I've done in my life, I think.
Oh, wow.
Also the hardest thing that I've ever done.
Yeah.
It was a long 2 years, but it really made a big difference to me. I think that I did okay. The feedback from
you were phenomenal.
Feedback from the kids and the parents was pretty good. But it was just also amazingly challenging to do that work in a place like the one I taught in. But that makes me think, well, yeah, it was hard to do that work, but imagine like growing up there, right? So that's really what made me start thinking about, okay, well, what if I'm not going to be a teacher forever, and I kind of knew that I was only going to be in that for a couple years. What professions could I do that would have an impact on the neighborhoods, on the environment that these kids are growing up in, or kids all over the world are growing up in, right? and what's a job that does that? I honestly started doing research about like, what are jobs that help neighborhoods or think about communities or things like that. And I didn't know anything about urban planning at all, or had never thought about it. But that's what kept coming up, is that's a profession that kind of addresses that, or you can address that in that profession. So that was really attractive to me. And that's why I went to grad school to become a planner, so that I could, again, think about ways that I could use my faith and my skills and my love of community and things like that to help places that needed help. So that's kind of where that came from.
That's a great story. Today, in your job, so I would understand that as a public servant of a sort, right? We don't really, it's inappropriate in our society to mix religion with how we serve the public openly, right? But my question is, as a person of faith, in the background of what you're doing, you're obviously thinking about these things. You might even be praying about these things.
Sure.
You certainly might be inviting God into how you do what you do. So returning to that idea of justice, what kinds of things are happening in Manchester that you're working on right now?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things. And in Manchester, it's a very interesting place, very diverse, small city. Really a microcosm of all of Connecticut. If you took the demographics of all of Connecticut and you kind of boiled them down to 60,000 people, you're basically talking about Manchester.
Wow.
The demographics follow the state pretty well. We have, a real diverse community in terms of socioeconomics, racial and ethnic demographics, the economy. So that makes it a really interesting place to work. And as part of a really interesting place to work, you're getting feedback from all these different people, all different types of people, all different types of groups and communities, business owners, all different types of people. So when it comes back to justice, one of the things that I think is important as a planner, we're bound to a code of ethics, really, and to me that really jives with my faith, I think. So one of the things that we're bound to do is to make sure that underrepresented groups are represented in decision making, right? So trying to find different ways to engage folks that haven't been part of a decision making progress or process over time. And that's a real challenge, especially because, as we know today, people are busy, people have families, and people have jobs, and people have all sorts of things going on. And to try to get folks' attention and to help them recognize the importance of some of these things that are going on around them, and help them become empowered to have influence over those things, that's a challenge for sure. So like a typical time when this issue comes up is when we talk about housing in particular, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this is true in most cities and towns in Connecticut. But whenever someone proposes new housing, unfortunately, it seems as though like the worst of neighbors tends to come out. And a lot of times you'll hear discriminatory comments at public hearings or online or whatever it might be about like, why would we invite these people to be part of our neighborhood? We're a nice, quiet, et cetera, right?
Et cetera.
Even in Manchester, which, people are used to seeing people who might be different than them, or even being neighbors with people that from different ethnicities or socioeconomic backgrounds or whatever. People, it kind of, I don't know, engenders fear, I guess, to some degree, because it's unknown, right? And so one of the challenges is to, start to educate people. So that's one of our roles, is to help people educate other people. So we have boards and commissions. There's a housing commission. Help them get the word out about why housing is important, what it does for people, what it doesn't do. Housing law, fair housing law, things like that. And so, I mean, it's challenging because sometimes people just aren't interested in hearing that. But that's definitely one of the places where I see the need to act on behalf of justice, and it's not always easy, but I think in Manchester in particular, I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve, and we continue to try to work towards bettering that conversation.
Well, that's because you're there on the job, Gary.
Well, it's not just me. But, luckily not just me. But there's a lot of people that care, about a lot of justice issues. So climate change would be another one. There's a sustainability commission in town, right? And you have people thinking about, like, okay, on the local level, how can we address climate change? I mean, climate change is a global problem, right? It's not something that you can have a huge impact on the local level. You can educate people, and there's small things that we can do in Manchester to maybe cut down on our carbon footprint as a people. But so you're dealing with everything from, like, there's like a 4-unit subdivision going in next to me to, like, climate change, right? So it really runs the gambit of all these different issues, and justice really, comes in, I think, into most of those things.
Do you feel well, I'm going to ask you something different.
Okay, go for it.
We're in the middle, you talked about climate change as a global issue. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. How are you sort of pivoting and managing and helping over in Manchester? What kinds of things are happening to make sure, again, going back to questions around justice, that things are being handled in a fair and equitable way? It's tricky these days.
Oh, it's really tricky. So do you mean, like, policy-wise? I mean,
anything that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, like I said, part of the challenge is making sure that information gets out to people, that may care about these things, and that people have their voice heard about them. So, and COVID has, I mean, you mentioned COVID, so that's the example I'll use, I guess. That's just caused tremendous disruption in all aspects of our life, right? And unfortunately, when things like natural disasters or pandemics or whatever, when those things show up, the people who are most impacted are the people that can probably least afford to be impacted, the people on the bottom in the socioeconomic ladder. So really, what I've seen, and this isn't me necessarily by any means, but this is the government, the local government, the organization in general. We've made sure to try to identify what are the critical needs right now, right? So what do people need? Do they need food? Do they need rent assistance, right, so that they can stay in their homes? Do they need better access to Wi-Fi or communication if they're going to school remotely or whatever that might be? And really trying to address those things. COVID was and is such a messy kind of thing, because you have all these various needs and lots of people trying to address them, but on various levels, right? So you have the federal government acting in one way, you have the state acting in one way, and then you have localities acting as well. Really hard to get all those things on the same page all the time. It's impossible, but even in a point in time, it's difficult.
Right.
So really, it's primarily about listening and then responding. That's how I would describe that, and pushing ourselves to do a better job listening, especially to people that don't show up at your regular public meeting, or don't communicate in the ways that typically decision makers might expect in a place like Manchester.
Can you talk for a minute about listening? So I think there's an intersection of what you do and what it is to be a person of faith generally when it comes to listening. What do you think about the idea of listening?
Sure. Well, I like to listen. I like to listen a lot more than I do like to talk. And I mean, that's really, so here's an example. We're doing our 10-year plan of conservation and development coming up this coming year. This is like a 10-year plan that establishes the vision for the community. And the biggest part of that, honestly, is listening to people, like listening to what they want their community to be, what they want their neighborhood to be like. And I mean, there's other parts that come after, processing it and then providing feedback. But then it's like systematically you go back to listening, right? So you listen, then you provide maybe like some tidbits and information in response to that, and then you have to listen again, and you have to keep listening in every step of the process, right? No matter what you're talking about. We do have pieces that are built into the system that are supposed to engender listening, right? So like if we have a public hearing, right? Your public hearing is you're there so you can hear what the community has to say, right? So that's a great idea. It's really, whoever came up with that, nice job. Right? Like 300 years ago or whatever, I don't know. Maybe
that's not just a thing that happens on that show, Parks and Rec?
No, it's not.
No,
it's probably similar, actually, in what people say. Leslie No probably has similar experiences than I do.
Do you read her books so you can get some tips?
Right, yeah. So like that's a great idea, but especially now we're seeing that that's the way that we've handled those things in the past is dated, right? And there's got to be new ways of listening.
Okay.
The radio or social media or going to visit someone at their home or having a presence at a community park or an event or things like that. Those are things that weren't anticipated, several hundred years ago when these systems were set up. At that time, the idea was like, oh, we'll have a big meeting and everybody in town can come and they can say,
because they didn't have Netflix.
Right, exactly. They didn't have Netflix. It was dark, so they couldn't farm during the day. The mills were closed or whatever. Just invite everybody and then everybody will come say what they think. Those days are over pretty much. And the people that can come out to meetings, right, they're going to be basically the same people that can come out to every meeting. I mean, there's a small amount of people that can do that have the privilege usually to be able to do that, or that really care so much that they're going to come hell or high water. They're going to like pay for childcare and like do so much extra stuff to make sure that they can come.
Right.
But so, back to the point, I guess, is we've got to think creatively about ways to make that easier for people so that we can listen to more people and hear what they have to say.
Well, talk about listening and being a person of faith. One question that comes my way, and you don't have to address this question directly, but I use it as an example, is the idea that churches are 501c3 organizations, right? They're not taxed. Some people think that's wrong. The point of bringing that up is just to say that churches are serve a particular purpose oftentimes as they are set within the context of a community. That's part of the rationale behind not taxing them. How do you work with churches? How does Manchester incorporate churches into the overall life of their community?
Sure. So believe it or not, working with churches, it's like people see that as like a more recent.
I'm so sorry. I kind of messed up that question.
Okay.
Let me just say faith organizations.
Faith organizations.
That would be the better way to ask that.
Faith-based communities.
Faith-based communities,
Sure.
organizations.
So working with faith-based communities is really seen as like a kind of a newer phenomenon, believe it or not. You think of that as like an old school kind of thing to do, but in my line of work anyways, people have realized recently that if you want to engage people, you do so through the groups in which they are attached to, right? And you find opinion leaders or community leaders within these groups. That's a great way to be able to listen, like you said before, be able to engage with people. So, but that takes a lot of work, right? You have to kind of, figure out who the right people are. There's, probably 100 faith-based communities in Manchester or something like that. Try to get their attention and try to communicate with them about why they should care, why their faith-based organization should care about what's happening in town. And in my mind, if the faith-based community is doing what they should be doing, what hopefully they're called to do, they can't ignore what's happening in their neighborhood around them, their community around them, right? Because that's where they're supposed to minister to. So I've always thought that planners and others have kind of missed the mark on that for a long period of time. They haven't really thought about that. They've thought about ways to minister and ways to help, maybe not the word minister, but ways to assist people that need assistance within the community and to address their needs. But churches and other communities of faith have that kind of built in, right? That's what they they're looking for stuff to do every day to help out their neighbors. So why not plug into that? And so I think that's something that we're just kind of discovering now, at least in my world. It's kind of exciting. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm glad it's exciting.
Yeah.
All right, good. You were telling me before it's almost Manchester's 200th anniversary. We're getting close to the end of our time.
Okay.
You want to give a little plug about the 200th anniversary?
Well, you know what? We're still working on the planning for that.
Yeah.
So I would just say that, I'll make a plug for Manchester if I could. So
Go ahead.
So, as I mentioned before, Manchester is a really interesting place, and I know a lot of people in the Yukon community, especially, either live there, they might live in the apartments there, or spend time there, or shop there, or whatever. But it's the type of place that we need as a society, similar to a college campus, right? You're bringing a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds together, and that provides opportunity for conversations, critical conversations. You have people from a lot of different faith backgrounds, a lot of different socioeconomic backgrounds. In Manchester, we have a super regional shopping center, Buckland Hills, right? We also have a little downtown. So the mixing of those things, it's like real life, right? It's not like a town where you kind of have all single-family homes, and then you go to work in another community and you see people only like you on your street. And Manchester has embraced that over time, and we continue to do that. So hopefully the next 10 years doing this planning process, hopefully we'll figure out kind of what's next for Manchester. A lot of places in Connecticut are kind of fearful of change, and I think Manchester is one place that's kind of ready for what's coming next. So that's what excites me about it.
Well, I had a wonderful time talking, Gary. I really appreciate it.
All right.
I've had a good time too.
I had a great time. I didn't get to listen to quite as much as I wanted to.
No, that's not why you're here. This is my turn to listen. Everybody, this is Gary Anderson. Gary, what's your official title in Manchester?
I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development.
All right, so if you have any problems with planning or economic development in Manchester, or questions in general, Gary is up for your questions. Gary, thanks for being on the show. Everyone, this is WHUS Stores. I'm the Reverend Brian Blair. I'm the priest over at St. Mark's Episcopal Chapel here on the campus of Yukon. Come on by anytime. This is Crossroads.